This is chapter 8, recording 4. A fair amount of our patients are going to be geriatric patients. And so oftentimes we're going to have to make modifications to how we transport because there's a lot of skeletal changes that take place as we age. One of them being bones just become more brittle, they break easier. So we have to be a little more gentle. Bones bodies overall, not just bones, tend to get more rigid. They don't bend and flex the way that they used to. And then there's a couple different kinds of spinal curvatures that present some pretty interesting challenges when we're trying to get a patient ready for transport or actually during the transport. Many patients can't lay on their back on a backboard or a scoop stretcher without causing further injury, so we have to sometimes get creative. There are geriatric specific mobilization devices, such as a vacuum mattress. You may or may not have these on your service, so just make sure that you can consult your local protocols. A lot of our geriatric patients or older patients are going to have a fear of their illness or disability. Just having to go to the hospital is going to possibly be overwhelming because there's that facing their own mortality and the fact that there's a higher likelihood of them getting admitted into the hospital. So try and be very sympathetic, compassionate, empathetic, slow down, explain what's going on, kind of anticipate what your patient might need, and take that extra step to ensure that your patient is comfortable. Here's some pictures of those different positions. Kyphosis, they kind of get this big sway back to them. Laying on a backboard with somebody that's extremely kyphotic is going to be pretty much impossible. You're going to have to put a lot of pillows and stuff behind. And if you cannot safely get them onto a backboard, don't force them onto it. Spondylosis. This is the curvature of the spine a little bit, but in a different way. Their spines on the back of each of their vertebrae become very prominent and can break off pretty easily. So we want to make sure that we realize that. You can see the differences. The one on the left with the kyphosis has a very pronounced inward curvature. The one on the right does not have that inward. It's more of a straightening of the spine where there's a natural curve. Here there is not anymore. I mentioned bariatrics earlier, but we'll go into it a little further here in the next two slides. This refers to the management of those people that are obese. Approximately 76 million adults in the US are considered obese at this time. 40% of those are aged 40 to 59, 30% are 20 to 39, 35% overall are 61 or older, and then 17% of children are obese. Bariatrics can produce some huge problems for us. The larger the patient, the more likely he or she will need emergency treatment and transportation. Bariatric patients overall are taking a huge toll on the health of pre-hospital workers because we have back injuries that account for a large number of missed days of work. It's really hard to do this job if your back hurts. There are special equipment to help safely move these patients around. They continue to come out with more and more equipment that is at a higher rating to allow for larger patients to be able to use them safely. However, just because the equipment is getting to the point where it can handle more weight, that doesn't necessarily mean that we can as providers. So make sure that you have a lot of help. Right now, there are things called mechanical ambulance lifts. They're used pretty widely throughout Europe, but it hasn't really caught on in the United States yet, where it actually lifts the cot up for you so that you don't have to support any of that weight. We are just not quite there yet, unfortunately. Bariatric stretchers, they're specialized for overweight or obese patients. It has a wider patient surface area so that you don't end up pinching your patients in those arm rails like you would on a regular stretcher. There's a wider wheelbase, which allows for more stability. Some are actually equipped with a tow package and a winch, so that this can help facilitate loading into the ambulance. And the most important feature is that they can hold up to 900 pounds overall. Regular stretchers absolutely top out at 650. About 400 is the last cot that I used. We didn't go over 400 on it. Power cots, these are battery operated, and they have controls that allow you to raise and lower the feet so that you're not having to bend over or actively lift a whole lot more. The added controls and features, nice, but it increases the weight of the stretcher overall, which is extremely hazardous when you're on uneven terrain or even going up and down steps where you have to pick it up. It's more likely to be thrown off balance, and then you have an injured partner, yourself, or the patient themselves. So be careful. Portable or folding stretchers. I have not really seen these outside of the military. I know that places have them for like mass casualty incidences, but they are a strong tubular frame, and then it's kind of like a ripstop fabric over top of that. There's no second frame, there's no adjustable undercarriage. It sits on 4 feet that are not very tall whatsoever. Some of them do have 2 wheels. I have never in my life seen one that had wheels on it. Typically, you end up folding it in half to store it, but they're still pretty cumbersome. This works well, though, if you need to transport somebody out of an area that's pretty rough and you can't take a lot of equipment with you. These weigh a heck of a lot less than wheeled stretchers, but oftentimes you and your team are going to have to support the entire weight of the patient. There are straps that you can put around it to keep them on, but those straps are not actually affixed to the folding stretcher, so can kind of keep them on, but it doesn't truly secure them to it. At a minimum, with the non-wheeled type, you have to have 2 people. Flexible stretchers, these are made of a flexible plastic. They can actually be rolled on the side and at the foot so that they kind of encompass the patient and cradle them. Really good for storing and carrying. They actually roll down pretty darn small so that you can get them in this bag that they come with. They don't extend much up beyond the patient's side overall. I mean, it does encase them a little bit, but not severely. You can put a patient in this and drag it over especially rough terrain. We had these in the military. Um, so you could put a patient in it, and there's a very long strap up at the head that you could put around your waist and take off running with your patient if you needed to. These can also be belayed or rappelled down by ropes, as you can see them doing right now in the picture. This is definitely the most uncomfortable stretcher. People that have fear of small spaces tend to panic a little bit. There's absolutely no support on the back whatsoever. It's very hard. And so, I mean, definitely not comfortable. It kind of squeezes you in. So just know your patient's not going to enjoy this all that much. Short backboards. The one that's pictured here is called the KED, the Kendrick extrication device, which you all should have seen at lab day. But this is used to immobilize the head, torso, and neck of a seated patient that has a suspected spinal injury. And these are used just until a patient can be immobilized on a long spine board. So you don't want to transport a patient in this device. You want to move them over to a long board when possible. Short boards are about 3 to 4 feet long. There are some wooden short boards, but those have pretty much all been replaced by the KED device, just because it's a lot easier to use and it's a lot easier to clean. The next resource is a vacuum mattress. This was mentioned earlier. This is an alternative to the backboard for immobilizing geriatric and pediatric patients. The patient is placed on a mattress and the air is removed from the device, kind of vacuuming around them. It provides immobilization, comfort, and also thermal insulation to try and keep your patient a little bit warmer. The thermal insulation is pretty important for your geriatric patients because they do have a hard time regulating their own temperature. They tend to get cold more easily than your average population. And they lose a lot of muscle mass. So their shivering reflex that keeps us warm doesn't necessarily work on a lot of your geriatric patients. So keep that in mind. Throw a blanket over top of them as well. I'm going to go ahead and stop here and we'll go on in the next one.